Thank you to you all for joining us this evening for NAHT's special meeting for members in special schools, alternative provision and PRUs. We appreciate that this meeting has been called at short notice, but obviously there's been incredibly fast-moving events this week and ones that have affected you and your staff in your schools and your pupils particularly. So we are delighted to welcome you to this meeting and we hope it will be a useful meeting for you. My name's Laura Flynn, I'm an organiser for NAHT and I'll be facilitating this evening, and we're going to try as much as possible to make this feel like a members meeting if we were there in real life. We are going to be asking for contributions from members and we will be bringing members up on screen to speak. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, but we're going to use that slightly differently tonight. We're going to use that as almost a hands up if we were in a meeting in real life. That's mainly because we know you will have lots of questions, particularly in light of today's guidance, but a lot of those questions will be for the DFE, and us as NAHT, we won't be able to answer them. But the main thing for this meeting is we want to hear your voice. We want your feedback, particularly on today's guidance and what the reality has been like for you in your schools today. So I ask you, please do use the Q&A box and use it to make comments that you would like to make and that you would like to make to the panel and like to make to the meeting, and we will bring you up on screen to do that. And you can upvote other people's questions and other people's comments, especially if somebody else has made a similar comment to what you would like to make. Rather than making the same comment again, we ask you to upvote for that person. So as I said, we're going to be, the main point of this meeting is going to be hearing from yourselves. So we're going to begin with short opening remarks from Paul Whiteman, who is General Secretary of NAHT, and Marijke Miles, who is the Chair of the NAHT SEND Sector Council and Head Teacher at a special school in Hampshire. Also on our panel tonight, we have James Bowen, who is NAHT's Director of Policy, and we're also pleased to welcome NAHT's National President, Ruth Davies. Please do feel free to tweet around this meeting with the hashtag COVID School Response, but we do ask you to not include any comments from the chat function on Twitter tonight, but you are welcome to include meetings of the panellists who are not members of NAHT who've come up to speak. And a replay of this meeting will be available tomorrow. So just to make people be aware, if you are contributing by coming up on screen, you will be part of that replay, but it will be available for members only. And can I ask people, when they do speak and come up on screen, if you can just introduce yourself for the benefit of the BSL interpreter, that would be appreciated. So just to remind you, please do use the Q&A box as if you were putting up your hand in a meeting. Let us know any comments or questions or feedback that you want to give to NAHT. As I said, we really want to hear from yourselves, especially in light of today's guidance. So I'll begin by inviting Paul Whiteman, NAHT General Secretary, to make some opening remarks. Thank you, Paul.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this hastily arranged meeting today. Everything seems to be done in haste at the moment, excuse me, but please don't blame us for that. That's an inept government that's leading us at the moment into having to do things very, very quickly. And I just wanted to start really by saying just how proud I am of you as a profession in what you're doing right now to make sure that the children and young people in your care are getting the very best support that they can, whilst responding to last minute decisions of government to try and arrest the transmission of the virus in the community, which had been on the cards and they've been warned about for quite some time. And that's been a feature, hasn't it, of the government's response to this whole pandemic. Late decisions, misreading of evidence, misreading of the direction of travel, and you having to pick up the pieces time and time again. And today, in special and PRU and AP settings, it's even worse than normal. In the last time I spoke to James, we were still waiting for the last iteration of the advice to come through, and we've been working with government all day to try and get some sensible advice to you. And as I understand it, that advice isn't as sensible, or won't be as sensible when it arrives with you, as we wanted it to be. And I'll just ask James to take us through shortly just the events of the day. So what we need from you, colleagues, please, is to have some faith and confidence in us that we will put your case over the next few days. We will argue with government to bring the relief that you need, but please have the patience that we don't have all of the answers for you this evening. This is such chaos in government at the moment, and I know it's affecting you very, very badly. And we met with Marijke and colleagues earlier in the week just to try and find our way through. So tonight's really important from your point of view and ours. We need the stories that are happening on the ground. We need to dispel the myths that government are trying to portray, that everything's okay and you can look after every child that's normally in your care. We need to be able to explain the practical barriers that you're facing day in, day out, so that we really get purchased with those. So I'm going to be more in listening mode than talking mode this evening, but then we will follow that through with campaigning on your behalf and trying to find solutions. So what can I offer you this evening? All I can really offer you, I'm afraid, is hope. And I'm on a little bit of a Barack Obama kick at the moment. I'm reading the first volume of his autobiography, Promised Land, and I'm also revisiting The Audacity of Hope. And where do we get the audacity as a profession to stand up to government in the middle of a pandemic and say, government, you're getting it wrong? Well, we have that audacity because you're the professionals. You know how to deliver things, and government needs to start listening to you and start reacting to you and working with us as a professional association. And I mean, really working with us as an association to deliver the solutions on the ground. And where they're most complex in your arenas, in your settings, they need to listen even harder so that you can bring all of your expertise to bear. I always remember walking around Marijke's school and how uplifted I was when I visited her school about the work that's done and how much damage is being brought to your settings right now by an incompetent government. So let's maintain that hope. Let's maintain the hope that government will listen, because it's making such a mess of it so far. It needs to jettison the advice that's taken it down the wrong roads and listen to the advice that will take it to the right places. So please contribute freely. Freely of your experiences so far this week, freely of your experiences in the pandemic, and we will take them forward and we will try and find solutions for you as quickly and as comprehensively as we can. But enough from me by way of introduction. Laura, I don't know whether James just wants to add anything about what's gone on today or just get straight into the contributions, but I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry I'm losing my voice. I'm zoomed out. As with all of you, we've all worked tremendously hard over the Christmas period and everything else. And I've got to a point today where I think you're about my 12th Zoom meeting of the day. So my voice is going, and if I need an excuse for listening mode, it's that. But I'm really, really pleased to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. James, do you want to contribute, or shall we?
Yes, please. Yeah, I'll just for a couple of moments, if that's okay. Hello, everyone. Nice to be with you. Just to sort of give you a quick recap, I'll take you back to Monday, which feels like a lifetime ago already. But yeah, as soon as the Prime Minister made his announcement, I think it's fair to say that our first and most pressing concern was the implications for special schools and AP. Straight away when we heard, special school will remain open, that caused us huge amounts of concern, and that was reflected in the email we sent out on Monday night. So I hope you saw that. We made a point of raising our concerns around special school AP, and also our members in early years who are facing similar challenges. What we've been doing since Monday night is certainly not sitting on our hands, as you would expect to hear. What we've been doing is we've been telling the DfE repeatedly what our members in special schools and AP have been telling us, which is that they desperately need the discretion and the flexibility in terms of the number of pupils and the proportion of pupils who attend their school. And this just blanket approach of every single child with an EHCP is by definition vulnerable, and therefore by definition has to be in school, is deeply, deeply unhelpful. And that's what we've been hearing. So we've been arguing that very, very strongly. We have then been spending the last 2 or 3 days, like you, waiting for that guidance to come through. You would have seen, or many of you would have seen, it hit our inboxes, I think, about 4 o'clock this afternoon. If you haven't seen it, you've got that treat to look forward to. I think it's fair to say we are extremely disappointed with it. Our view on first reading, and it is first reading at this stage, as I'm sure it's for you, is that it goes nowhere near far enough in terms of giving school leaders the flexibility and discretion they need. In fact, in places it works against that. At times, I think it's quite ambiguous. There's things like where appropriate, and it doesn't define what appropriate is. It's confused in places, and actually in places it seems frankly quite contradictory. So we already have a whole host of questions that we've already gone back to the DfE with. I'm sure after tonight we will have a much larger list of those questions, and just to reassure you, we will be taking all of those, and alongside that, of course, we'll be developing our own guidance. We have had some ready since Monday that we were hoping that the government would issue something sensible and we could put it on the back. We're going to have to rethink that and rewrite that now based on the government's guidance. You will have noticed that there are perhaps some ambiguities and flexibilities in there that we need to look very carefully at, but we'll say that more about that in due course, really. But I'll stop there and let people say what they think and give their feedback so we can make sure we're collecting all that.
Thank you very much, James. And so just to remind people, we're using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, almost as a hands up, as if we're in a real life meeting. So rather than putting your hands up via the Zoom reactions, just because we've got over 600 people in attendance, it's difficult to keep track of that. Please do use the Q&A box, not just to ask questions, but to say if you would like to speak in the meeting, and we will bring members up on screen, and we're trying to make it as much of a meeting as possible. And as I said earlier, thank you for everybody who sent in the numerous questions ahead of the meeting, and also for the questions tonight. We have looked at all the questions, but for tonight, we're wanting more than anything to get your feedback and your responses and what it's been like for you on the ground. So please do use the Q&A box for that. Before we start hearing from members, I'm going to invite Marijke Miles just to make some opening remarks as well. Marijke is the chair of our SEND National Council for NAHT and also a special school head teacher in Hampshire. So we're delighted to hear from Marijke. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and colleagues. It's fantastic to see you tonight. I'm sorry that I've got this great headset on, but if I didn't, you'd be hearing people outside the door screaming, kill him, and they're not talking about the Secretary of State. So I'm just muffling my household noise for a minute. It's fantastic to see you tonight. It's unbelievable to think that we're in the presence of 600 or 700 amazing leaders. But absolutely heartbreaking that we are seeing you again, and that we're having to find comfort in the idea that a crisis brings together our profession. It shouldn't be crises that are bringing us together. It should be celebrating the amazing things we do. I know you're really, really tired. I'm really tired. My senior leadership team are amazing and they are really, really tired. And so thank you for making the time tonight to share with us your views. And that's what we need to hear and we want to hear. Normally, I can win bragging rights competition about tiredness in any forum, but I can tell you on the screen tonight, I'm really hard put because I'm in the company of the hardest working people I know, and that is our HQ team and our NAHT lead team. And I really do want to thank them and to reassure you that we are tirelessly working to try and resolve things and take your concerns and your issues to the very heart of government. That's what we're here for tonight. They are incredibly thoughtful, incredibly clever people, and they really, really understand what we're up against. So really, you are not alone. You really are in good hands. And just want to implore you that no matter what happens this week, next week, the week after, please keep telling your leaders and please keep telling yourself that this is the best job in the world. I think we have to stop worrying about what the world thinks about us and what validations there are. We're not going to win it with the press. We're not going to win it with other people. But I'm reminded of the idea that the world doesn't know who you are, but for someone you are the world. And just to remind you that for your children and your communities and your families that trust you so much, you are their world and you need to keep going. You need to let us help you and support you in the NAHT and advocate for you and your families. Keep at it. We can do this, and we are in, without doubt, the best and most fulfilling and rewarding and profound profession that there is. So we're on your side. We want to hear from you, and I think you should get talking.
Thank you very much for that, Marijke. And we will be getting talking in a moment. So I will be inviting people to come on screen. You will see your status change and you will be promoted to what's called a panelist. If you could keep your camera off and yourself on mute until I invite you to speak, but that will be happening throughout the evening for people who have posed questions in the Q&A or made comments in the Q&A. Just before we do that, we're going to do a quick snap poll just about the guidance this afternoon. So we just want to know, do you think the guidance issued today by the DFE for special schools is fit for purpose? A very quick snap poll, yes, no, or if you haven't read the guidance. Thank you very much. And that poll will run for the next few minutes while we have some questions and comments and contributions from members. So the first person we're going to go to is Mihal. Hope I've said that right. Vits. Apologies if I've not pronounced that right. Mihal, if you're there, if you're able to start your video, or if you just want to, there we go. Great. Hi, Mihal.
Hello, everybody.
To make your contribution, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm in a car because I've got 2 little ones in the house, so it would be impossible for me to listen to you guys and to contribute to the meeting. Now, I wanted to make a few points. First of all, this week seems to have been a never-ending and probably the hardest yet for a majority of us. And with everything that is happening, I'm sure that I won't be the only one to ask these questions. And I really hope we will get the answers soon. So I've got 4 questions. The first one is about vulnerable pupils. If all pupils in our special schools have EHCP, severe learning difficulties and profound multiple learning difficulties, they fall into vulnerable pupils category. How are we supposed to reduce the risk of transmission, as that's what we should be doing in current climate? Lateral flow testing. We are under pressure to begin testing pupils from year 7 onwards. All of them have severe learning difficulties and profound multiple learning difficulties. They will not understand what is happening, and they're likely to become distressed by the process. So what's your view on school staff and visiting nurses testing pupils with SLD, autism, PMLD and sensory impairment? Another question, today the head teachers receive a message from DFE that section 44 letters have been withdrawn. What's your advice if staff use them when they feel unsafe? And finally, if school staff are at school teaching face-to-face, how can they deliver the quality remote teaching and potentially being scrutinized by Ofsted? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mihal. So that was quite a lot of questions there. And as I said, a lot of those questions we may not be able to answer. It'd be more for the DFE to answer, but we can take them away and pose them to the DFE. So if any of the panel, James, Paul or Marijke or Ruth and D, James would like to...
I'll start if I can. I'll come on specific on the lateral flow testing. I mean, I would say all 4 of those are all questions that are right at the top of our list. So just to reassure you, and they're all ones that we've been absolutely saying to the DFE, you need to answer this. And I know Paul will probably want to talk more about sort of the first one and the last one. On lateral flow testing, we have actually put out some guidance where exactly the point you make, where people have said to us, look, in my setting, the pupils I've got, the vast majority of my pupils won't be able to do the lateral flow testing because it's not appropriate for them. But also, if we were to start trying to, put swabs in noses and what have you, the trust that we would break with those pupils, they may not come back to school the next day. The damage that you would do in terms of that relationship that you spent years and years building up by trying to do what's quite an invasive procedure. So actually our guidance is, if you think that's the case, you don't do it. And if that means it's for a large number of your pupils in your school, you don't do it, then we think that's the right way. And you stick to the kind of the isolation approach and the standard approach. Because I think in terms of the risk reward ratio, it's not in your favor there. And I think, as I say, the damage you do to the relationship, the fact that actually the risk to staff, that we know that those pupils may well kick out, hit out, bite, for understandable reasons. I think you do that risk assessment and you explain to the parents and say, we don't think it would be right to do it. I would hope in 95% of those cases, the parents would agree and say, we don't want you to do it, because if you're telling me that's going to be the reaction that my child may not want to come back into school the next day, why on earth would I be asking you to do it? If in the small number of cases where they say, but I still do, I think you're still within your rights to say, our risk assessment says we don't think it's safe, so we're not going to proceed. Now, of course, that means you have to carry on with the standard isolating procedures and what have you. But I think, we have established a pretty clear position on that. And I don't think there's much alternative, unless people want to tell me otherwise and I've missed something obvious.
Right, so just to add to that, what a great set of questions, because it pretty much summarises the chaos that you're all experiencing out there right now. So I'll just pick up a few. On the vulnerability of pupils, the breadth of definition is simply too broad on that. And if we go back to March, where we were before, there was a much better understanding, I think, between the communities that you support and the guidance from government, where you achieved kind of understandings between your families and yourselves about who really did need that support and who didn't need that support. I think this is where government's got its messaging very wrong this time round. It can't have its cake and eat it. It can't say we need less children in school to stop community transmission, and then by the same token say, but we're going to widen the availability in terms of the definition of key worker and vulnerable staff. And we've got up to, in your settings, up to 100% attendance, and even in mainstream settings, we've got up to 70% attendance, and that's working against the ambition of community testing. It just strikes me their messaging is just all wrong. On the one hand, they're trying to be all things to all people on this, and they've got to make some difficult decisions and give some difficult leadership, and it's leaving you in those impossible positions right now. And we're making that case right now. Even this evening, we're making that case, and we're bringing evidence to show just how poor those decisions are. I made that case with colleagues at Public Health England and the scientists that are advising government this afternoon too. So hopefully they get a little bit more understanding of the context in which you all work. James has dealt with lateral flow testing. Just on two things, I'll finish on the section 44s. If I ramble on about Ofsted and forget section 44s, wave at me and I'll come back to it. On Ofsted, I honestly don't know what the government thinks Ofsted is going to inspect. Why HMI, who haven't been building the home learning packages that you're putting together, are expected to have any more insight than you on what works and what doesn't, I simply don't know. So how they can begin to think they can pass judgment on what constitutes decent home learning or not, I simply don't know. And I would imagine Ofsted are scrambling for an answer to that question right now. And the first point I can ask them, I will. The input measures that government seems to be relying upon, 3 hours and 5 hours, tell you nothing about the quality of learning. You all know that an hour with a pupil or a student properly engaged is much more valuable than 3 hours in front of a screen with their eyes glazed over. And we've got to give you the freedom as professional educators to make good judgments about how to deliver the very best education that you can in these circumstances. It's not going to replicate face-to-face education. And the sooner the government accepts that, gets alive to it and says, let's deliver the best we can, and manages the expectations of the community, then we'll be able to get on with it. On section 44 notices, I haven't seen yet, just because of the frequency of meetings today, the wording around the message from the DfE about the withdrawal of section 44s. What I do know is two potential things. I know the teaching unions have been encouraging their members to not necessarily rely on their first issue of a section 44, now that the majority of schools are supposed to be closed, and that they should come back to their leadership teams to help with the provision for the most vulnerable and for key workers, and then only rely on their statutory rights again if necessary. But I was picking up a message in conversation, and this is only in conversation, so James, you might be closest to this. If I err here, correct me quickly, but somehow that the government is now saying that section 44 can't be relied upon and you should ignore them if you get those letters. Well, the government needs to take care. The whole point of the Health and Safety at Work Act and section 44 of that act is that when the government is asking you to do things that are dangerous, you have statutory protection for you to say, actually, you can't force me to do that. It's dangerous and you're risking my life, and you can't call me to account, you can't sack me, you can't discipline me, you can't dock my pay as a consequence of doing so. Problem is that hasn't been tested in the context of COVID. So what the teaching unions are doing are saying to their members, you can assert that right, and we might end up having it tested in an employment tribunal or somewhere else in some months to come. But the government can't unilaterally state that they don't apply. So let's hope we don't get into standoff territory with that, because what the teaching unions are saying is, look, you've taken the goodwill and you've taken the commitment of the profession beyond its point of breaking. And the government should wake up to the point now, actually, that, you know, we warned them weeks ago that you couldn't hold the line for much longer, that schools were falling apart because of the demands and the extra demands placed upon them, and this was likely to happen. You'll know, of course, that we did our own, similar to section 44, we did our own judicial review application. And the majority of schools were closed before that would have been heard, and it answered the way that we put that application together. We're beginning to talk again about whether we should follow something up and similar for special and maintained nursery schools and AP. We're not there yet because in the answer that we got to our initial inquiry was a promise that they would answer our questions. So those questions are in again. I signed a letter this afternoon to try and get some clarity on that. So there's a lot in my answer there. And again, it's a promise of something in the future or a hope for something in the future. But I'm afraid that's the space we occupy this week, but we hope to move it on as quickly as we can. So I hope that covers everything for you.
Can I come in on the section 4 as well, Paul, just very, very briefly? And I think people looking at the chat bars are commenting on it as well. I think you're absolutely right that the DfE email that came out this afternoon said that they disagreed with the teaching unions taking a blanket approach to section 44. And they were saying it was an individual right that individuals had to exercise. Our understanding, and I think what we've seen today, is what I believe some of the teaching unions have done, is said that they are effectively withdrawing their blanket advice from section 44. But obviously, you can't remove individuals' rights to section 44. So someone as an individual still has the right to do that, whether their union suggests it or not. So I think, I think you're absolutely right. And that's probably the context of what's happened today. And I think from the comments down the side, I think probably people have seen that email coming through.
Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you.
Marijke, you want to come in?
Thank you. If I can just add something really quickly, and I'm aware I'm going to talk very fast, and our lovely interpreter, we've been asked to slow down a little for Sarah. If the LTFs were really effective and reliable, I wouldn't necessarily be saying this, but as we've got over 600 specialist practitioners here, I really want to just say a word about consent and the context and the long-lasting effects of potentially a fairly futile activity to condition our children to submit to. When I moved from SEMH sector to learning difficulties, it was staggering transition for me. Our children are so passive and so conditioned to the things that adults do, and I'm a passionate supporter of the consent project. And I'm just thinking about the LTFs and thinking about the amazing tea and consent video. And as much as it's funny, and I'm not trying to be rude or draw comparisons with the obvious areas where consent applies, I do think it's really, really relevant. And we have to remember the fact that in the area where consent's normally used, people can give consent and then afterwards feel quite violated and quite uncomfortable about what they submitted to at the time. So I just think, there is a wider picture for our children in terms of what they have to agree to. And no matter what the parental consent situation is, it is really clear in the guidance that at the moment of the test, the consent still has to be the young person in terms of if they withhold it, then we don't proceed. So I just think that's a really important universal picture to be thinking about what we're teaching the children, these children, about what might happen to them at school or anywhere else with adults overseeing.
Thank you very much, Marijke, and thank you to Paul and James. Mihal, I hope that has provided comment, if not all the answers to the questions that you posed. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, especially joining us from the car. Thank you. The next person I'm going to bring in is Clive Lawrence. Now, Clive, I think your question has probably been answered in all that, as I think quite a lot of information may have been answered. But Clive, I'd like to invite you to come and speak if you would like to, just to provide some commentary, maybe from what you've just heard or from the DfE guidance today, if you would like to do that, Clive. You're able to turn on your video and unmute, just to give us some feedback about what since today and what this week's been like would be really appreciated. Thank you. You're on mute, Clive. Sorry.
Thank you. I think it's been talked about quite a bit, but I think the main big question is just getting absolute clarity from the government and ministers with regards to this definition of vulnerable. Particularly as EHCPs have been now listed as vulnerable. Are government expecting special schools and other specialist sectors to have 100% of children in school full time during this pandemic? And then obviously then trying to balance that with demands and pressures from families and parents, and also in terms of the stresses and worries that that's causing for many of our staff in schools, really. I think we just need clarity on that.
Thank you, Clive. Would any of the panel like to comment on that? And just a reminder, as Marijke said, to make sure we keep as slow as possible for the benefit of Sarah doing the interpretation. Thank you. Paul, James, Marijke?
Yeah, I think just to sort of say, Clive, obviously that's probably our number 1, 2, 3 and 4 priority right now. I think that is the absolute key question. I mean, I've looked at the guidance that's come through today. It is deeply unhelpful, but there are bits in it when you read it. So, I'm starting to pick out certain phrases in it. I mean, it's clear to me that it says that if well, it doesn't say it directly, but I think you can take from it that if parents don't want the place, that pupils don't have to come in. Now, I know that might not solve a lot of your problems because if all parents want a place, you're still at 100%. But there are phrases, it seems to contradict itself, as I say, because there are phrases where it says, special schools should stay open to all pupils where appropriate. Well, my first response to the DfE is, well, what do you mean by where appropriate? Because to me, that suggests there are times when it won't be appropriate to stay open to all pupils. So there are 3 or 4 phrases that go through that guidance that I think we really need clarity on, like you say. And what we were arguing for throughout the week was for school leaders to be able to identify the most vulnerable. And I know that's a slightly clumsy term, and I know every child with a special school has a vulnerability, but in terms of which ones really need to be in based on the staffing levels you've got and what you could do. So I think it's just so disappointing the language they've used. But as I say, there are some phrases in there that we can go back and say, hang on a minute, there might be some room here, and we just need them to have a much more sensible definition. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you that they've given us that, but I can tell you it's certainly right at the top of our list.
And I suppose the other aspect, if we look at the lockdown back in March, why has there been that significant change, given that the COVID rate has increased and we've also got the new variant? Because back in March, head teachers did have that professional discretion, working in partnership with families to identify, if you like, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, to determine who needed to be in school and who didn't. So again, it's just getting that clarity as to what's now changed, which requires that group of children to be in school all 100%.
Can I just comment on that? It's not an answer really, Clive, and my apologies to Sarah doing the interpretation. When I get excited about representing you, then I slip back into my very quick speech, and it always used to work if I was selling a car. Perhaps it doesn't work when I'm talking in one of these meetings. But just on that, nothing has really changed in terms of why we would have larger occupation rates now compared to the occupation rates in March, other than the government's messaging. And the government has lost control of how society is responding to its instructions. And on the one hand, it's trying to frighten society by saying we've got the new variant and it is so much more transmissible than the last, and therefore we're locking down, and it's trying to instill some fear because people weren't responding to the tier 4 and tier 3s and what happened before. So it's been more dramatic. And then it tries to persuade us, but in schools it's less dramatic and there isn't the transfer, and it's saying that directly to parents. And I think also parents are showing COVID fatigue too, and they're worried about their children and they want to push their children more back into an education setting, ignoring the government's objectives to stop transmissibility because those messages are so confused. So I think the answer really isn't that the government is going to come forward with something new that explains it away, but that we need to push them for better clarity about community transmission so that they can make decisions about their own actions that support their own community rather than perhaps narrow needs within their own family, if that makes sense.
That's great. Thanks for your time, and thanks for responding as best as you can.
Thank you, Clive, very much. The next person I'm going to invite to speak is Kim Taylor. Kim, if you're able to please unmute yourself and turn on your camera to ask your question. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a privilege to be on this call. My question is very specifically about whether we can continue to campaign for the vaccine for special school staff who are on the front line, as we all know, and all of us on this call, not necessarily being able to socially distance. And, you know, for many of our TAs, I mean, I was talking to many of them today, you know, they actually will feel more confident if they could have the vaccine. They're quite angry, actually, some of them now, that, you know, other members of the NHS are getting this vaccine and they're not working in the front line, specifically working with people that are not socially distancing. So it's really, really, I know that we have to have prioritisation for older people. Personally, I wouldn't like to take a vaccine away from somebody who was an older person who, probably may die more than I would, but, we don't know. But I just wondered whether there was some work going on to actually push for this. And if so, I know we've got the petition in Parliament on the 11th of the month coming up, and that's got enough votes. So it will be a question in the House of Commons. So I just wondered what was happening in relation to the NHT pushing for this, because it is so important to so many people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kim. Marijke, might you like to comment on that?
Just really briefly, I mean, the shortest comment is yes, we're campaigning for it, and so we should. As I understand it, the way that they put it to an independent committee to give the list of priority, and as I understand it, they're working on how to reduce death rather than reduce the levels of infection. And what the government's trying to do right now is to reduce the levels of infection. Now, I think one feeds the other, actually. And if you're on the front line and exposed to infection, then whether that's in a hospital, whether it's in a school or wherever it is, you need that level of protection. So we're campaigning on it. Yes, there's the petition and everything else, but we're arguing with public health and we're arguing with the government every opportunity that you should be moved up the agenda in terms of receiving those vaccinations. So I hope that gives you some reassurance.
I think it does, but I think, not that I don't think all teachers should get it, but, special school staff are actually in the classrooms now, and many of the other sectors are actually doing remote learning, so that, the risks for them are much less. And that's what many of my staff were saying today when I was talking to them about it. They feel very strongly that if they are to be expected to continue to work with children all the way through the lockdown, and work with children quite close up and personal, which all of us know on this call we do, that it's about valuing those people sufficiently that once we've got through the initial very vulnerable group, that perhaps that our staff are considered to be a high priority and that we're valued. That's all I think. Thank you.
Kim, can I just give you, and also just to add to that, sorry, just to give you some reassurance as best I can. Obviously, I don't get to make the decisions on the committee, but for sort of a number of weeks, we've been making the case for all school staff to have the vaccine. I think what changed on Monday was that we started saying we still believe all school staff, but those working in special schools, AP, and early years now have a particularly strong case, because those are the sectors where people are in now, where, as you say, I was at home working, they're in far more sort of challenging circumstances. There is no social distancing. So just to kind of reassure you in terms of the case we're making, we are certainly calling for all teaching staff, all school staff. But what changed on Monday was us saying a particular focus on special, AP, and early years, in light of the sort of Prime Minister's announcement on Monday night. So the argument is being made. Obviously, I can't promise you what the committee are going to decide, but we are definitely making that specific argument.
Well, thank you for that. And I think it's really important. We know the variant is much more contagious, and I think that's what's frightening a lot of staff at the moment. And obviously people need to know that we are pressing that. And I know it's great to know that you are. So thank you. I just wanted to raise that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Marijke, would you like to come in?
Very briefly, thank you. Just to reassure colleagues that we really do mean special and AP and all other sorts of alternative provision when we do use the term. And I think one of the things that's really come clear to me in through this crisis is that so many people just don't understand the kind of children that we're working with. So just to reassure AP colleagues and that we are absolutely understanding the type of children that they're working with, and again the very, very precious and highly skilled staff across all of our sector. I just think there's a shocking gulf of public understanding. A special school either means people think that are thinking really PMLD and SLD, or they think AP is naughty kids, and they have no idea of everything that lies in between, and all of the very vulnerable children that are in AP, all the mental health issues, all of those other medical things, and our hospital schools too. So it's a public perception problem, not an NAHT problem, and we absolutely do get it, and that's why the council is so very well balanced with people who really do represent our whole sector.
Thank you very much, Marijke. Before I move on to our next contribution, I'm just going to close the first poll that we had about the DfE guidance, and you should be able to see the results on screen with you now. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it's quite an overwhelming no to whether people thought the guidance for special school was fit for purpose, but also many people hadn't read the guidance earlier on. So we can also adjust that for the people who voted yes, no to get an accurate percentage as well. Obviously, the guidance only came out this afternoon and you'll have been busy within your school settings as well, so you may not have had a chance to read that, but thank you very much for that one. And I'm going to ask you another question, another poll. You're doing these polls and having this feedback in this meeting is incredibly useful to NAHT, so we do very much appreciate your participation in this. The second question that we are asking is about attendance in your school and on today specifically. We realise some schools may have been closed, so that's why you might put 0. But we are asking, what was the proportion of pupils who attended your school setting today? And if you could answer that poll question while we go to our next speaker, that would be appreciated. Thank you. The next person I'm going to call on is Elizabeth Farndon. Elizabeth, if you're able to turn on your microphone and your camera and make your contribution to the panel, please. Elizabeth, are you? There we go. Thank you.
I mean to put my hand up, but I'm happy to express. I have asked a lot of questions and made a number of comments. We are a newish free school in temporary accommodations, due to move in February to our new accommodations. I read the guidance on Monday, the headline email from the DfE when I woke up, and read the first paragraph that said included special schools being open, and put nursery separate, which had been clear in the Prime Minister's message, and then read below and read to meet the needs of vulnerables and key workers as you did in March through May. So with that confidence, emailed my chair and vice chair. We agreed, oh, we've got clarity, and sent out a similar survey around key workers, critical workers, if you felt your child was exhibiting safe behaviors at home or a danger to themselves or the family. We're an autism school, the whole range from very early learners to very high functioning advanced learners. So did all that, and then started seeing the stream from NAS, from you guys, etc., saying, oh, all open. We definitely don't feel safe to be open to all pupils. We had already asked our parents to voluntarily keep their pupils at home during that week to roll out testing. We're all age school, and thankfully had over 80% of our parents agreed to keep their child home that week. So we weren't in a position where this week was difficult. And yeah, very difficult now because, of course, in the news, it's all vulnerables, all EHCPs. We've managed to feel safely that we've got 40% of our pupils on either full or part-time table from next week. But obviously, given the guidance that came out late today, I was going to have an extraordinary FGB, but then we felt like we'd done a good job and overall parent feedback was okay. Of course, they wanted full-time, but was okay, and felt confident that we should wait for guidance to come out before potentially calling a full FGB. So it's really, really difficult. If we were in our new building, we feel like we'd be able to meet 60 to 70% easily within kind of 2 to 3 in a room with 3 adults. We have 100 staff currently and 82 pupils. So our staffing ratios are very high in a very cramped building that has very limited toilets, etc., etc. So I suppose one of my biggest questions is, at this point, given the guidance, yes, there's that little bit of flexibility. Our risk assessment feels we've got it right. Are you guys as a union in a position to back us if we do get parental, my governors did say, can parents sue us?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Marijke or Paul or James, would any of you like to make any comments at all?
Should I deal with the final point? What can we do if you get sued? Because that's probably the real punchline, isn't it? And we have circumstances. So if the school gets sued, that it's the governing board and it's the school that has the responsibility for the defence. There's nothing we can do as a union in that regard, but our job is to protect you as the individual head teacher, school leader that will be involved in that, and to make sure that your individual interests are taken care of. So if you think you're approaching that territory, the first thing I would advise you to do is phone our helpline, so that we can make sure that whatever actions you take, you record in the right way so that you've got your defence ready if it comes to that. My sense of it actually is the government can't keep control of every school and every decision in every school. And it's posturing in terms of saying you must, you must, you must. But actually working hard with your communities, working hard with your governing bodies, working hard with local authorities, you know, the hope there is we get to sensible decisions and we get to sensible working practices whilst we lean on government to give you some more freedom. But if it comes to that, the first people you phone is us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that. We're going to have one last contribution, and that is going to be from Helen Birkenhead. You made a point in the Q&A, so if you'd like to make that to the meeting, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned that mainstream are expecting that the students will be tested before they come into school to keep everybody safe there. As somebody said previously, our students are unlikely or unwilling to be able to be tested, and yet we're the ones that are expected to be in. Also, our students, as we all know, won't socially distance. Many of them are like toddlers, where they're touching things, they're putting things in their mouths, they're coming up close to staff, and they need that close interaction. So to me, it seems that we're more at risk and yet more expected to go in more than mainstream. Just find it really frustrating for staff.
Thank you, Helen, for those comments. Does anyone on the panel like to respond? James,
I was just making a note of it. I was just making a note of it. I think it's a very good point. I'm not sure I can answer it as such, but it's a really good point. It's another one. I'm just kind of sitting here collecting all these really crucial points because these are all the sort of things that DFE need to hear. So I don't think probably there is a response as such, Helen, is there? And other than we share your concerns, hear what you're saying, and very much we'll make sure we represent it.
Thanks.
Sorry, I didn't pause to drop you in it. I just, for one moment, couldn't find my unmute button. So my apologies there. But I think it just shows again, Helen, just the utter lack of understanding of different settings and the pressures that you're under, that a testing regime could be rolled out in a way that is so unsupported. Different settings and different arenas, and the pressure that you're under, and we will keep pushing back on it. And if it's there to reduce risk, how can you? You have to offer it in a way that it works, or offer different circumstances and different strategies of control if it doesn't work in your arena. So we'll certainly keep pushing on that as well.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much to Helen. Hopefully we can just squeeze in one more contribution. I'm going to ask Lucy Callow to speak. Lucy, you've asked a question about, or made a comment about EHCPs. If you'd like to turn on your camera and unmute yourself, we'd be delighted to hear from you, Lucy.
Hello, everybody. Hi. And thank you for inviting me to ask my question, which is about EHCP and reasonable endeavours. And everybody on the call will be aware that last time the requirements in EHCPs were became more flexible. I wouldn't say reduced, but became more flexible around making best endeavours to meet those provisions. And what I hear now is that there's no intention for that to happen this time round, and I'm failing to understand how that can meet in the middle, really, and that we can be expected to make full EHCP provision as well as have everybody in the schools and sort of carry on as though the pandemic isn't happening to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, for that. Would any of the panel like to feedback on that at all? Marijke?
Sorry, my unmute response is slow. Yes, I'm happy to take that. I mean, I think it is about risk assessment and the level of need. We do not foresee the reasonable endeavours returning. There was really quite a significant backlash in the special community or after that, and a lot of issues. So I think reasonable endeavours is off the table. What I think we can do to protect ourselves is do an audit of our children and the additional needs and the additional specifications in their EHC plans, look at how closely we can replicate that in different ways, certainly speak to parents. I mean, if parents choose to take a leave of absence, I think it's really important to record that and to make sure it's part of the conversation that therefore these things can't be delivered in school. Keep really careful records and show how we've got as close as possible. But we're not directed to continue the provision off-site. At the moment, the continuity applies to the curriculum and the curriculum only, which again is probably partly why there is such keenness to have all the children in school. But I think sometimes going through and having a good audit can be quite reassuring. It has been for my school, and what we can try and replicate and achieve other than face-to-face is more than we think sometimes.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Marijke. James and Paul, do you want to come in at all?
I was just going to say, yeah, absolutely agree with what Marijke said around reasonable endeavours. One thing, if you haven't, and you may already have done, Lucy, I've looked at today's guidance, and although it doesn't talk about reasonable endeavours, there is a phrase in there, and I was trying to look as we were talking then, where it does sort of acknowledge that there will be occasions, I'm looking at it now, where special schools may encounter circumstances where they cannot provide their usual interventions and provision, and it goes on to sort of acknowledge that. So I think it's probably worth having a quick look at that. I know that's not the same as reasonable endeavours. I know it's nowhere near as strong, but there are some phrases and some sentences in that guidance that I think might be helpful in that regard that we'll look closely at. So yeah, not as strong as reasonable endeavours, but worth looking at that, I think.
Great, thank you very much, James, and thank you very much to Lucy for your contribution just there, and for all of the members who've come up onto the screen to ask questions and make contributions tonight. Thank you very much. I'm going to close the poll where we were asking about attendance, and the results, the most frequent answer was between 31 and 40% of pupils. So thank you very much for taking part in that poll, and James and our policy team will take it away. And as I said, it really does help us to have this initial feedback from yourselves here tonight. I just want to mention before we move to Ruth for some final closing remarks about some of the work that NAHT has been doing and has been participating in terms of launching the all-party parliamentary group for special educational needs and disabilities. That was launched last March and has held several meetings over the last few months, particularly in lockdown, and has been particularly trying to hear the voice of practitioners within special school and alternative provision, but also from parents and young people themselves. If you would like to hear more about the work of the all-party parliamentary group for SEND, which NAHT is now the secretariat of, there is a link in the chat room where you can sign up to the mailing list, and you can also see some of the issues that we are part of campaigning on alongside MPs as part of the APPG, and it's on Twitter at APPG_send. Thank you very much for that, and I will just move on to Ruth, our National President, Ruth Davies, for some final closing remarks. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you all for taking time out of what will have already been a pretty crowded evening for you this evening, taking time out to join your colleagues and fellow members. These are indeed times like none other, especially for you and the highly specialised settings you lead. Social distancing, if we think this poses difficulties and challenges for us in mainstream settings, what's absolutely clear are the huge hoops that you're having to jump through daily to keep your settings safe. Lots of schools will talk about the challenges of staffing and depleted workforces. How much more so is that the case for you, where you are reliant on such specialised staff with a very specialised skill set? And yet you've joined the event this evening because you care, because whatever the personal challenges you'll each be facing today, this week, ultimately the well-being and long-term prospects for the learners in your care matter to you. They matter to you incredibly strongly. and they'll continue to matter to you greatly. And that's come across incredibly powerfully and clearly this evening. Paul started the session off by paying tribute to the quality of your leadership, to the way you keep going in the face of disappointment after disappointment with regards to the quality of leadership from government. Michael, I think, said it, and a few others at the start, described this week as being the hardest so far. It shouldn't be this hard to make sense of government guidance, which should be there surely to loan support, not an additional level of confusion. It shouldn't be this hard to explain the challenges, as I said, to social distancing within your settings, or how the concept of pupil consent needs to be nuanced. You know, leading on from the session's discussion and seeking to draw the threads together, the first thing I want to remind you is that none of this is your fault. It's not of your making. Where we find ourselves, it's not your fault, it's not of your making. And the current situation is actually a response to a catastrophic failure of government to manage and control a national crisis. Failure of government, not you, not school leaders. We held an induction session for branch officials new to their role this morning, and in it we spoke about modern trade unionism being about so much more than confrontation. NAHT's unique blend of trade union principles with its strong professional association roots ensures that the interests of the learners we serve remain at the heart of our decisions. And your learners in particular rely on being at the centre of that strong focus. I think Sean said in the chat that your children, they're not falling behind, they're adapting, they're learning new skills, and most importantly, they're overcoming. So where do we go from here? Well, we are a solution-focused organisation, and like all good leaders, we love a long-term strategy and a sound plan. Sadly, we've witnessed little of this from government, particularly over the last 10 months, and the way in which you have successfully protected your communities in the face of such chaos illustrates how much, as leaders, we often achieve in spite of and not because of those who really should be there to support our schools. Ministers outclassed by teachers ran a recent Guardian headline, and it went on to explore the concept of reacting intelligently to challenging circumstances as being what ultimately sets us apart as school leaders from government. Government who are finding themselves consistently behind the curve, choosing conflict over collaboration, ignoring advice even from its own trusted independent sources. Just a few of the things that we could lay at the government's door right now. Let's be clear, we're in this position then of that we find ourselves in because of a failure to rein in the recent surge in infections. Now, this evening is neither the time nor the scope to start a conversation around where the fault for this lies, what failures of judgment and planning have led us to this position that we find ourselves in, and so forth. But one thing I do know is that that failure is not yours. We are the victims of the fallout as much as the rest of our communities, and yet you still get up every day and you lead your teams, you lead your schools onwards and upwards in pursuit of safe solutions. If the recent surge in infection is to be reined in, it will need a strategy, and we know that currently the government has neither a strategy nor a costed plan for a safe and orderly return to school. And schools, for their part, have neither the required specialist skill base or spare resources to continue to manage the risks unsupported, particularly by government. We cannot continue to fight this on our own. Tuesday should have been grasped by government, not as day one of lockdown, whatever number we're now up to, but day one of the return to general education plan. But sadly, the radio silence from government continues to deafen us. We want to help to return to education and to our school settings as we once knew them. But the prospect of a unsafe return to school and to normal routines worries us, but so does the prospect of an indeterminate period of school closures and school upheavals. When will this period of unknown come to an end? It won't come to an end without a plan, and we commit to continue to raise on your behalf the issue with government and to dial up your voice at a time when the media would be looking to distract and certainly dial it down. I think in the face of what does at times present, I suppose, is gross incompetence and maybe even self-serving indifference on behalf of government, you have proved yourselves to be trustworthy. Disheartened we may have a right to be, but in the quality of debate this evening, the energy and determination to continue with the fight towards a long-term, safe and sustainable solution should encourage every single one of you. Thank you for all you've done to get to this point and to all that you commit to continue to do. And as Marijke said at the start, remember, you're not alone.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for being with us tonight and for those quite inspiring words at the end. Thank you. We'll call the meeting to a close now. I want to thank you all for attending, and a particular thank you for the 106 people who posed questions and made comments into the box. My apologies, first of all, that we've not been able to get through everybody, but we will take those questions away, as with the questions that you posed when you registered for tonight's event, and also the comments in the chat. All of this is incredibly useful feedback for us in representing your voice to government and making them aware of what the reality is like for you and your staff and your pupils in your settings locally. And apologies that we've not been able to answer the questions, but like I say, a lot of those were more for the DFE rather than for us to answer. So hopefully this meeting's been useful, and it's for me, this shows what a union is about. We've had over 600 people coming together tonight at quite short notice, but it's part of being a community of school leaders, and it's been a great opportunity tonight to bring together those of you who work in special schools and alternative provision, who have had a very different experience this week to our members who work in mainstream schools. So we're very pleased to have welcomed you all tonight and for you to have given up an hour of your time at the end of a day. If you would like to get more involved in NAHT, there is opportunities to become a local official within your branch, or to be involved in campaigning aspects. And I say this particularly because you are our members in special school and alternative provision. We need you to be part of NAHT. You are NAHT. We need you to be part of your branches locally and be part of our officials who represent our members locally. You're incredibly important and valued, and we want your voice to be heard within the union, but also when we go forward to government. Just a reminder that a recording of this meeting will be available to watch tomorrow. We'll send an email to those of you who attended, and it will be available for members to watch via the website. It won't be available to non-members. We are very pleased to have had Sarah working for us tonight, interpreting for BSL, and apologies if we did speak too quickly for you, but we're trying to improve with that. So thank you to our panel, to Ruth, to James, to Marijke and to Paul, but most of all to everyone who's attended tonight, and as Ruth said, a huge thank you for everything that you're doing in your schools and in your community. It truly is exceptional, the work that you and your staff are doing, and it is really appreciated by your pupils, your community, but incredibly by your union. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. We will be hosting further meetings going forward, and we will be looking to hold further meetings, particularly for special school and alternative provision. So please do keep an eye on your emails for those. Just for now, we'll say good night. Thank you very much.